Selamat siang dan selamat sejahtera pada semua. Thank you for the introduction and thanks for inviting me to speak at this conference. It is a pleasure for me to share our work in playful and gameful education, which I hope will be insightful. First and foremost, I would like to give a bit of a context. I am based at the Disruptive Media Learning Lab at Coventry University that was set up to work with colleagues and students across the university to imagine the way we teach and learn. And one of the main strands of work is playful and gameful practices. And I'm also part of the Post Digital Culture Research Center, in particular, the investigation into playful and gameful design for informing the design of experiences that is meaningful. And one thing that I'm going to emphasize on in my talk today is very much around experiences that is going to contextualize education. And it is very important for us to really think of why do we use different types of technologies and how do we contextualize the use of different types of pedagogy that is going to inform the learning experiences that we want to create. And of course, we have all been challenged by the current pandemic in terms of the delivery of teaching and learning. But we have to remember that we have to make sure and be careful and be critical in terms of how are we going to use educational technology and how can we contextualize this experience to ensure that the experiences that we are going to create are going to be meaningful for the students whom we are going to engage. So the question is, how do we design engaging and meaningful experiences? What are those experiences? What will we nurture, for instance, the different types of competencies, perhaps learning objectives, the change of attitudes and behavior, and are these going to be transferable in terms of what the learners are going to experience? Can they adapt the competencies and skills that they have gained and use it in the real world? So these are the things that we can actually think about when we create learning experiences for the learners. So one of the key things that we are focusing on is very much around repurposing, remixing, reusing playful approaches. Can we design experiences which are inspired by play and gameplay? How can we replicate the emotional connection of someone who are actually enjoying a playful experience, and can we replicate this in a learning context? So this is something that is interesting in terms of how we can take inspirations from something that is already there. And playful learning itself, there are so many different types of play that will allow or enable different types of skills to be developed. And this is something that we can actually investigate. This is something that we can try. We can experiment, and how can those different types of playful approaches be able to support the teaching and learning of our learners. And it's all about the magic circle. What I mean by the magic circle here is the limitation and the restrictions of play that we impose, whether there are the rules of play or whether there are the different types of measures that you want to include in that particular playful methodology or pedagogy, and whether we are going to use games. With games come with rules, and how do we actually navigate the playful environment within this particular context? So what are the different design considerations that we can actually include as part of the design of our learning experiences? So whether it can be as restrictive as possible, or it can be something that is freer, free play, and how can we encourage the sense of autonomy, the sense of agency for not only the learners, also for the educators to be able to use and reuse different types of playful experiences in their teaching and learning. And there are so many different headlines, especially during COVID-19, where games and gameplay um, demonstrated that they have been useful in encouraging learners to um, socially interact with their peers in a safe environment. and we are able to replicate different types of environments that we can't have access to because of movement restrictions, on and so forth. So learners are able to interact with different types of topics, different types of environments, and they can learn different types of skills while navigating the gameful and playful environment online. So this is something that we can actually learn from. And there are so many different reasons why we should try game-based learning, how students can make connections out of concrete and abstract concepts. How can you boost engagement? How can you encourage learners to discover their own intrinsic motivation in learning? How can we make information more accessible and easier to understand? And how can we encourage learners to apply whatever they've learned in a classroom setting and so they can apply it in the real world? So we can create different types of scenarios that will allow us to support this. This is something that is so interesting that we can actually explore because there are so many different types of examples out there, different types of empirical studies which have been done in terms of the efficacy and effectiveness of game-based learning in encouraging learning, encouraging engagement, and encouraging the change of attitudes, perhaps, and the development of different types of competencies. So one of the key initiatives that we are running in the UK, which is called Game Changers, and Game Changers is trying to reduce the barrier to the development and the design of playful and game-based resources, game-based learning resources. So everyone can play and everyone can create game-based learning resources. So we believe that it is important for us to encourage and onboard those who are not familiar with games to be able to understand how can we take inspirations from them and how can we create new experiences that is going to be exciting, not only for the learners, but for ourselves as learning designers and as educators. So the premise is, how do we think like a game designer? How do we look at existing games and understand the different types of rules, the different types of actions that we can take inspirations from that particular game? What is the actual dynamic in terms of the playfulness? Is it a game that will allow social interaction? What are different types of navigation? What are different types of activities and tasks that needs to be done? So that will provide the connection between the rules, between the actions and the conditions. What are the feedback cycles that we want to include in that particular experience, so we can learn from different types of games. And the next one is the aesthetics, meaning that your player and game interaction, what is the actual interface, the interactions, the different types of features, what are the emotional connection that you want to create that will allow someone to be able to interact with your game-based learning resources and be able to engage with the different types of knowledge and the different types of competencies. So yes, we have to think like a game designer. And we are trying to keep the process simple. So one of the key processes we are using is very much around a more holistic and pragmatic approach, meaning that it is a bottom-up approach where the context, the needs of the learning itself will inform the enabling methods, the enabling gameplay, the enabling technology. So meaning that when we try to look at learning topic, we are trying to find what are the actual gap in that particular learning, and that will inform the different types of activities that we think that will be useful for that particular learning, and how can we gamify it, how can we add gameful aspects to it. And then the last thing that we are going to look at is what types of technology that is going to support this type of learning. So we want to ensure that people would do it in a pragmatic approach in trying to understand the actual gap in the learning before we can actually create something that is playful and gamified as well as technology enabled. So our colleagues and students at the university have implemented, this particular approach where they come up with the different ideas on what are the different gaps in the learning that they will wish to address. So in this case, it was Italian language. How can we encourage people to learn in a more active way? So they went through the process in trying to identify the gaps and different types of activities that is going to be useful. And then that informed the different types of game design. So they were inspired by Pokemon Go. So in the end, they managed to create pervasive game-based learning in Coventry City Centre, where you would use your mobile phone and you can walk around the city centre and you will go through the different stories, different narratives, interacting with different characters, and then different types of activities will be triggered at a different location in Coventry. So this is quite exciting to see how they've they've gone through the process, which demonstrate the power of co-creation. Yes, perhaps it can be a bit complicated to understand in terms of how can we actually do it, how can we start, how can we ensure that we will be able to understand the process. And we do understand that it is important to onboard, those who are not familiar with games, and especially in terms of the process of game making. How do we create something meaningful? How can we encourage open gaming literacy? How can we encourage co-creativity through play and game design thinking? So the program Game Changes allow us to onboard in a simpler way so that you can practice the process and you can master it. We are not striving for perfection here. We are striving to better the process. The more we practice it, the more we understand the process of the co-creation and creating something that is going to be useful. So the idea is a great idea can stem from something that already exists, meaning that we can remix existing inspirations from existing games and use those inspirations to create new game-based learning solutions. For example, in this case, this is an activity that we normally use in our workshops, and we have also developed card games, which are physical cards as well as online version that you can actually have access to if you go to gchanges.org. So these flash games, for example, here the topic is social responsibilities, and the game inspiration is Gobak Sodor. So I think those of you who are from Indonesia, you would know what this game is. So you will be able to learn the inspirations from Gobak Sodor in terms of the mechanics, the dynamics, the aesthetics of this. How can we reuse the same approach and address the topics of social responsibilities? So you'll be surprised to see that people can actually create game ideas in less than 30 seconds. That is fantastic. We have done so many different workshops and people are amazed they can create new ideas rapidly. So this is the idea, is for us to not to strive for perfection, is to strive for co-creativity. How do we exercise our creative muscles, which is important so that you can practice it. And once you have done and gone through this process, you can practice the approach. So this is a remixing play into a game plan approach where you will be able to go through different processes and iteratively creating new ideas, refining it, testing it, then refining it again, and redefining the different types of aspects that you wish to include. So you can actually go on this screen, you can see a QR code, so you can have a look at the example workshop that we normally run. That will allow you to practice it, because practice makes better. Again, the caveat is we're not striving for perfection. We are striving for us to better our practice. So this is something that is interesting that will allow us to be able to understand the different types of games that we can take inspirations from and see and analyze the different type of mechanics and the aesthetics and the dynamics and use them to inform the design of our new games. So here you can see some examples. There are so many different examples, but these are just uh, uh, 5 different examples that we can have a look at that can give you an impression of the different types of platforms, from analog to digital and through to something that is more hybrid. For example, the teacher remix games, it is based on a hopscotch game. So this is like a physical game that has been repurposed to teach science. And you can also use card games. For example, here, these are the card games which have been created to encourage empathy. And you also see homeless Monopoly game, which has won an award in 2019, where the game inspiration was Monopoly and the topic was homelessness. How do we encourage people to understand more about the spectrum of homelessness? And you can see educational escape rooms here, which is a more hybrid approach and physical, where it has also won a Gamification Europe Award for research in 2018. And you can also see an example here, location-based games which can be created, which will allow you to interact with, physical locations, and different types of learning activities can be triggered. So all of these are inspired by existing entertainment games that will allow teachers to be able to think of different types of aspects that will be interesting and useful for the different types of learning that they would wish to support. And here is an example of how game changers has been adapted in Malaysia. So here we have worked with a university which is UNIMAS in Malaysia, and one of the speakers today is from UNIMAS. So this is an example of how we have worked with teachers in very remote parts of Borneo, where we will encourage them to create games for the classroom. And they played games for 2 hours, and then they created a new game for 1 hour, and they test it out with their learners. And they were so surprised to see how the process can be so simple, because it is all about taking inspiration from existing games and reusing it, and use it to teach any subjects in your classroom. And this is a project that has produced so many different outcomes, and because of this, Game Changers has also won an award for gamification and education in education and learning 2019. And it is all about looking at teachers and educators as agents of change, because teachers and educators are at the front line. So we need to ensure that we upskill them, because upskilling of teachers is one of the most effective and direct means of achieving all of the SDG 4 targets for UNESCO in terms of equitable, inclusive, quality education. So it is important for us to support the teachers. And the creative culture has produced a practice community where the different types of games are shared among teachers, as well as different types of blueprints for how do you remix play and design thinking cards for teachers in Malay language, and also play cards for guiding teachers on how they can create new games. And this is something that is so interesting that we are so proud of. And also, the first gamification center has been set up in Unimas. So this is the first gamification center for education in Malaysia. And as you can see, it is a physical lab which has been set up, where teachers, educators, students, lecturers can actually work together and explore new ways for reusing playful and gameful methodologies in teaching and learning. And due to the pandemic, the group has also created the Creative Culture TV, where they created videos that were used to engage teachers in understanding more about game-based learning, about gamification, about playful learning. And the project has also informed this project, which is called ACES, and ACES aims to investigate how playful learning can develop different types of competencies that will influence our social resilience. So 3 countries were involved in this particular project. Um, uh, Unimas from Malaysia. We've got UMPO, who is the host of this conference, which is from Indonesia as part of the partners, and also host from Vietnam. And we will have speakers from the 3 countries today in this particular conference as well. I'm sure that they will elaborate more about the different types of work that they are doing and different types of impact that they have achieved. And one thing that we are working in this particular project is to see how we can actually work with the learners on the individual levels, on how can we develop resilience on an individual level that will contribute towards community resilience. And how can we also support teachers in terms of their resilience, which is important, and how can this influence the resilience on the environment, the institutions, so on and so forth. It is such an interesting project that we are working on, and it is still ongoing. And then one of the key things that we are developing is how do we map the different aspects, because playful learning has been implemented in so many different ways, and there are evidence of effectiveness, but we need to understand more about the granular understanding of what makes it effective, which aspects that would help us to encourage different types of behavior or different types of competencies, different types of resilience perhaps. So our intention is to see how frugal aspects and playful aspects can be mapped, which can be mapped against the competencies that we will wish to develop, and how these competencies will influence resilience. So this is something that we are still testing, and this is something that is new and novel from the project that we wish to pursue and we wish to develop further. As an example, we developed a template or a taxonomy that will allow us to see how we can map the different types of learning that we will wish to happen. What are the learning objectives? What are the pedagogical constructs? And in this case, we are looking at Bloom aspect, and how would this be defined in a concrete example of what the learning aspects are? What are the verbs? What are the different types of activities of learning that were mapped against the playful aspects, the frugal aspects, the different types of skills that we would assume or we will hypothesize would be supported by these playful activities, and also linked to the country specific skills, because policy um, provides different types of priorities in terms of different types of skills that the different countries are focusing on. So we have to empathize with this as well, and then link it to the resilience. What are the different types of resilience spectrum that we would wish to happen, and how do we evaluate this? How do we measure this? So as an example mapping here, this is from the partners in Malaysia, and one of the small activities that we are looking at is how do we encourage learners to be able to critically respond to challenges, how they can demonstrate creative problem solving, and how they can do reflections as part of a creative group discussion, and how can we encourage them to work as a community. So here we are trying to break down this particular activity in terms of what are the learning objectives that we wish to address, what are the pedagogical aspects, for example, in terms of Bloom aspect, in this case, the learning aspects, the playful aspects, the what are the different types of activities that we would wish to happen, the frugal aspects, the competencies, and then the resilience that we hypothesize that would happen. So this allow us to really look at this in a more granular level, so we can analyze it further, we can evaluate the relationships, and this will provide a rich database that we can actually look at that will allow us to understand more about the interworking of playful learning in this particular context. So as you can see here, the cascading impact and change that we have achieved through game changers doing the empirical experimental groundwork, which has been adapted in Malaysia and which has informed two new initiatives that we are working on. First one is the new iteration of critical culture, where we are engaging with 400 teachers in training, as well as ACES, where we are expanding the impact in Southeast Asia, especially in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Vietnam. So you can see this is something that we are interested in. If you are interested to get involved with us, please let us know. And we are investigating playful and game-based learning in so many different ways. As you can see on the screen, the different types of projects which are funded by international funding, UK funding, local funding in different countries as well as in Europe. So we're trying to understand more about the different aspects of play and gameplay, and how we can then get take inspiration from the different types of aspects in the development of meaningful learning experiences. And this is something that we are pushing in so many different work that we are doing. And our work has also been used by the EU Commission, and in this case, under the School Education Gateway, where our approach has been used as part of the tutorials of how do we upskill teachers in Europe. So this is something that's been evident in some of the research work that we have done, the practice work as well, and how we have worked with the different partners across the world, which has informed the different work that we are doing. So playful learning is something that everyone should explore. Playful and game-based learning using different types of artifacts that will allow learners to engage creatively with learning. So this is something that I would encourage everyone to explore further. And the world is your playground. So think about the experience that you want to create. Take inspirations from play and gameplay, and test your game-based learning or playful learning resources out. Because as I said before, we are not striving for perfection, we are striving to better our practice. And with this, I would say thank you very much for having me. Terima kasih. And some of the stuff that I've talked about today and are part of the book that I released last year. It's a year in May. Actually, it was released in 2020. So this book is about game science, which is investigation into playful learning, game-based learning, serious games, gamification, and how we can actually take inspirations from play and gameplay, and how can we actually use that to design new learning experiences. And the book also includes different types of examples which we have done and experimented. And with that, thank you very much to the organizer. Thank you very much to everyone. Enjoy your day today, and hopefully that all of the different talks that you are going to experience today will be insightful. Thank you very much. Goodbye.